Your baby's mind is growing even before they arrive. The more you talk and sing and play, the more their mind will thrive. You gotta talk with your baby, play with your baby, read to your baby, make out you're a lion. Talk with your baby, play with your baby, read to your baby. Your words will grow their mind.
Well, hello and welcome to Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. We'll bring you the experts who can decode what's happening in your baby's brain and give you practical tips on how to nurture their development and help them to thrive.
And we promise to do this without adding to the ever-increasing parental load.
I'm Kate. I'm a mum of two and I've been passionate about early childhood policy for 20 years.
I'm Amelia. I'm mum to Grace, who's 5, and Ted, who's 1. I'm a journalist. And the other day I was genuinely excited when I found out Peppa Pig's mum's having another baby.
I heard that.
Yeah.
I heard that.
But Kate, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we'll be exploring a baby's remarkable ability to communicate right from birth. We're going to dive into social and language milestones, what they are, what we may be looking for when it comes to spotting early differences also.
Sometimes you think being a parent these days is so complex and there is so much to deal with that perhaps our parents didn't. But then I think about how lucky we are to be in an era where we know so much about early childhood development, about milestones, and there are programs and checks around to support our kids and us as parents, and that we're living in an era of increased knowledge and awareness of different ways that our brains work.
We are. Now, the topics we're talking about today will also include talking about autism, and we'd like to note up front that there are different preferences about how autism is talked about. Some people prefer the term people with autism, others prefer autistic person, and we really respect everyone's views and we'll use both approaches. To guide us through this conversation is one of Australia's most respected scientists and researchers on autism and on neurodevelopmental differences. We are delighted to have Professor Andrew Whitehouse joining us today. Andrew
is the Professor of Autism Research at the Kids Research Institute Australia and the University of Western Australia. He also leads the research strategy at the Cooperative Research Centre for Living with Autism. With over 300 published papers and more than $80 million in research funding, he's a leader in understanding neurodevelopmental differences. Andrew's work has helped create Australia's national guidelines on autism diagnosis and early therapies. One of Professor Whitehouse's groundbreaking studies is now having a real-world impact. The Inklings program is helping babies as young as 6 to 18 months who are showing developmental differences in social communication and interaction, and it's having wonderful results.
So, Professor Andrew Whitehouse, thank you so much for being with us and welcome to the Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast.
Thank you so much. What a thrill. It sounds like my mum wrote the intro.
I did see you grinning proudly, actually.
Might have called her for a few tips.
Maybe hold the thrill until you see the questions we're going to throw at you today, because we really want to get straight into learning about your work. We know that as new parents, we often wonder what's going on and what our baby needs in those early weeks and months. And often parents think that babies can't communicate in those early days. So we'd love to hear from you. What is a baby's capacity to communicate right from their earliest days?
Well, that's a fantastic question because science has really advanced so much over the last 20 or 30 years, and it shows us that actually babies communicate with us in the womb.
Wow.
Babies communicate, they can hear what goes on in the outside world, particularly responding to the mother. And there's all these beautiful scientific, really elegant scientific studies showing how and when babies physically react within the womb to what goes on outside. But let's stick to what happens as soon as they're born. Amazing amount of scientific studies has shown, all sorts of studies in the maternity ward showing that actually babies are born with a remarkable ability to communicate. So there's all these studies showing that when a baby comes out into the bigger world, that they look at the face more than they look at arms, and they look at our eyes more than they look at our ears. And it really shows us that babies, humans, are born to form social relationships. And that's the exciting thing that we see all throughout childhood that unfolds, and it starts from those very earliest moments. So babies are just like little humans. They're there because they want to be understood, they want to be loved, they want to be cherished, and that's ultimately our goal. How do we understand who they are so we can help them be whoever they want to be?
We know that babies obviously develop at their own pace, but there are some typical milestones, especially with those social and, communication interactions. What are some early differences we might see or some things, obviously looking at the face, but what are some things that we'll see that we can see they're communicating with us?
You're exactly right. The last sort of 20 or 30 years, we've focused so much on those very clearly demonstrable milestones, things such as your first word or when they take their first step or even further back when they first roll or, all of those things are very easy to understand. But actually social communication is just as easy. We haven't just focused on it as much. So obviously the milestones change as we get older. So let's peg ourselves at a 12-month-old baby. And just so to get it in your listeners' minds, 12-month-old baby is a baby that is, certainly well and truly out of the infant stage, but might be hoisting themselves up and holding onto a table and may even be taking the first step. That's the age we're looking at. Now, when we're talking about social communication, babies really are doing a lot at that age. And so we look at 5 or so markers. The first is, are they responding to their name? We would expect most babies to be responding to their name, even just a sort of a head turn when you'd call in their name. Eye contact, it's not just the amount of eye contact, but it's also the nature of the eye contact. Is it fleeting? Is it enduring? Do they look at you when they're seeking to communicate? Then imitating so crucial. Babies learn everything through imitating. And so can babies imitate clapping of the hands or waving bye-bye? That kind of stuff is really important to helping us understand how babies are developing. Social gestures. Are they showing you things out of interest, for example, which shows us that they're really desperate to communicate, which we expect of a 12-month-old. And then something that we call very scientifically proto-declarative pointing, which is such a boring name. It basically just means, are they pointing to express interest in something? So, hey, look over there. There's something that I'm really interested in. Now, any one of these in and of itself, if we're not seeing them, doesn't really matter, but it's only when we're seeing sort of 3, 4 or 5, the absence of those, that we start to go, this baby may be developing a little bit differently. Let's take a deeper look.
I actually wanted to ask you about that because the examples that you gave of other milestones, which we've always looked out for, first words or first steps, vary hugely in babies. And so often we'll say, don't worry, let's let babies develop at their own time. So where do you get the balance between when you step back and recognise that babies are different and when you actually start to pay attention and maybe recognise that there might be something different about the way that the baby's developing?
That's a really great point because there is huge confidence intervals around first step. Some babies are taking their first step at 10 months, others take up until 24 months, and that's all the range of normal. What we're seeking to understand is actually it's not just these in isolation. What do we do when we look at all of these together? There is also that sort of very intangible but completely reasonable gut feel that parents have. These milestones don't develop or they don't suddenly just appear at 12 months of age that we start to think about them. A parent has had 12 months, and if you're the mum and even the dad, you've had 9 months prior to that, you do get an understanding about how you feel your child is developing. And so what I would say is that we look at all of these milestones together, not just the 5 that I mentioned, but also your walking, also your talking, all of those things, as well as your gut feel. And we start to put that together. And what I say is that you're never going to come up with a very clear answer. But if you think that your concerns outweighs your sort of your other feelings, that's the time to take action.
So this probably leads us into a really good question, talking about the Inklings program, gut feel and inkling. What do parents do or a carer if they start to have inklings that their child's social, their communication skills may not be meeting those milestones? And like you said, they're not hard and fast, but if you've just got that persistent feeling.
It's very simple, is don't wait. Let me talk just a small time about brain development. Anyone who has seen a child develop language knows just how unbelievably remarkable it is. Children go from really not saying any words, well, clearly not saying any words, to be able to tell you jokes within the space of about 2 years. And, kids start to develop language 1 to 2 words a week. It ramps up to 1 to 2 words a day. And then it gets to sort of 8 to 10 words per day they are learning. And it's not just they're learning, it's sticking in there. And, you get to sort of my age and you start to realize that, hang on, that's the amount of words I'm losing out the other end. It's a remarkable ability. Like in our house, it was kind of zero-sum game with our kids in for a while. Then we start to say that is the brain that produces a remarkable ability to adapt. And that's what we need to take advantage of. For so long in the era of developmental differences, we've waited. We've adopted what's called a wait and see approach. That, hang on, we're not too sure whether the baby's developing differently, so let's wait and see until we're sure. And usually that's at age 3, 4 or 5. But all those remarkable abilities of the brain are really during those early 2 years. So the first thing is, don't wait. If you have a sense that things are developing a bit differently, seek help, because there are things that we can do. And that's part of the Inklings program, is that how can we empower parents to create that enriching social environment around the baby from the very earliest stage.
So the Inklings program, WA, you're in WA, it's now in South Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about the Western Australian experience, what parents have gained from the program, any results, and also what sort of children are we talking about can benefit and parents can benefit from this program?
Absolutely. Look, the program itself is about helping parents understand a couple of things. Firstly, how important they are to their child and their child's development. They are so crucial to their child's development. Secondly, that their baby is communicating with them and in remarkable ways. And thirdly, what they can do to change the way that they're interacting with their baby to create that environment that builds communication more within the home environment. And so that's really the nutshell. What it's been through a couple of clinical trials that has shown that over the course of providing this sort of 5-month program, when we follow these kids up later, they're saying more words, they're understanding more words, that there's greater parent-child connection. And so that's the nub of the program. The program has been rolled out across Western Australia, and really what we've found is that it's provided an outlet for where there really wasn't an outlet before. The program is for babies aged 6 to 18 months who are showing developmental differences or developmental delays in the area of social communication. All those things I was talking about previously, and all of a sudden there's a place to be referred to so you can actually receive a support that empowers the parents, doesn't take the agency away from parents, rather it gives the skill to the parents to do all those things that they want to do to support their most precious and treasured thing in the whole entire world, that's their child.
I love the emphasis on parents participating. It's not just on your child to, let's get better, hit these milestones really quick. It's, the parents working with and perhaps learning a bit more as well. Andrew, I don't suppose you can tell us though what parents in other states can do if they don't have access to it.
Well, the Inklings program can actually be accessed by telehealth, and so there is the website that people can go to, inklings.org.au, where they can actually sign up for this remotely. The key thing, though, is that we are on the precipice of a revolution in child health, where we are moving from wait and see to identify and act, and through programs, such as Words Grow Mine, Inklings, through the federal and state government's approach to early childhood around how do we actually provide proactive support rather than reactive band-aids at the other end? We are in that revolution, and so more and more services can and will and should appear that provides parents that outlet to actually, when they have a concern, to actually follow through with that referral and actually receive that support.
So can I just be blunt and say, we're talking about children from 6 months of age. We're talking about having concerns that they may not be meeting milestones. If parents feel that way and say they go for help, they look up the Inklings program, does that mean an autism diagnosis is inevitable, or what can be the outcomes of seeking this support?
Definitely not. Definitely not. And what we do know is that there is a very broad range of children who have social communication differences and delays between 6 and 18 months. Only a small minority of those kids will ever be on a path to receive a diagnosis of autism. Other children might resolve by itself. We don't know, but actually the broad majority will have lower level delays and differences that don't necessarily meet criteria for autism, but might cause them struggle throughout their schooling life. And so there's a very broad range there. What the Inklings program is, it's not an autism program in any way, shape or form. What it is a parenting program that helps empowers parents to try to help them identify the space, time and attention and energy within that very small confines that parents have to make every one of those moments count. All of those small moments do count, and how can we make sure they count in a way that supports the child? So it's not an autism program, only a small amount of kids will be on that trajectory. But what this is saying is that we should have low threshold entry into these early support programs, not a high threshold entry. If you require support, you should be able to get it.
Can you give us some actual examples about what you can actually do with a 6-month-old? What are some of the...
So much. Yeah, so much. And I love this. Look, I mean, I'm now out of the hurly-burly of my own parenting journey. But, my kids are sort of in late primary school, but I mean, we're coming up to another time, the early time. It's exciting, it's amazing, it's boring, it's frustrating, it's grueling, it's all of those things. And what the Inklings program seeks to do is to actually help parents see what's in front of them. And so often what happens when we see a 6-month-old or let's say a 12-month-old who comes in who is developing differently, parents often bring them in and their baby's interacting with them in a way that they don't understand. And they often come in thinking that perhaps their baby's not too fond of them. And it's just so heartbreaking to have that. And of course, it does interrupt that connection. And so one of the first things that we do, and we use video feedback techniques, so we film parents interacting with their babies, and then we play it back to them, and we show them the ways in which their baby adores them. So the first thing is to help parents understand how much their baby loves them, how much their baby needs them, and the ways in which we can enrich that environment around them. Genetics play a crucial role in the way that we develop. We will develop in a certain way because of our genetics, but actually environment plays an equally important role. And what, in terms of how babies develop, and what's the most important environment around that baby in the early years? It's their parent. That is their sphere. That's that baby's world, is that parents. And so when babies interact with parents, we need to help parents understand what the baby's seeking in that moment. So helping parents read their baby's minds to a certain extent, what babies need for that communication to go back and forth a few times, which is the building block of brain development, but ultimately what their babies need to feel perceived, understood, loved, cherished, to get that communication going more and more and more.
I think this is a really important point, because I think for some families that might have an inkling, there is this old-fashioned view that you get help and you're going to be suggested medicating your child, but this is actually about supporting parents to help boost communication skills, not diagnosis necessarily, not anything else, but just different supports. And can you imagine being helped to be able to read your child's mind? I'd love you to introduce a program for children later in age, which I could certainly sign up for.
It begs the question, though, what about parents who fall outside, the 6 to 18 month threshold? What do parents of, say, 2 to 4-year-olds who have an inkling do?
Yeah, I mean, there are programs there in that older age that do something similar. The difference at that age is that we are working on more functional things. So for 6 to 18 months, we're not working on toileting, for example, but all of a sudden at 2 to 4, toileting becomes a pretty urgent issue. And so it's same with sleep and same with eating and those kind of things. So it becomes a really important aspect, but it's within a broader context of what that child needs that age at 2 to 4 years of age. What we've got really good at in the area of child development is diagnosing and providing intervention. And what we've started to realise is that actually that's not the way that we should provide the best support, because diagnosing and intervening makes us focus on what a child is, what diagnosis they may have, rather than who that child is. And there have been all sorts of ways in which we've sort of moved our community towards a diagnosis-first approach. What the Inklings program does is that actually 6 to 18 months, we're not looking at any diagnosis at that age in any way, shape or form. You don't diagnose that young. What we're recognising is that here is a child who needs support because of who they are, and let's lean into that. And that's the idea about this, and we're hoping that this will transfer throughout the early childhood.
Can I just ask a question about, you would have come across many parents who have an inkling. Sometimes that inkling isn't shared by both parents, or perhaps with their grandparents or others who would scoff and say, you're being a fretful parent, chill out.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Give
You're
the child a
stressing
chance.
out.
How do you deal with that? Or what advice do you have for a parent that does really have a strong inkling, but that isn't being necessarily heard or supported by others in the family unit?
It's a really great question, because it is much more common than we think. I think that our community has shifted a lot, and I have seen a reduction over time in discrepancies between parents, but it still exists. My answer to that is take the clinical out of this completely, is that what we're talking about is helping a parent connect with their child. And once we actually focus on that, rather than my child is developing differently, I need help, it's about helping parents connect with their child to understand each other. That might sound airy-fairy, but it's actually the building block of all development. And if we can go in with that narrative, which is not a false narrative, because that's the heart of the program, all of a sudden we start to frame things a bit differently.
I do feel there's a key element here of parents needing a bit of confidence to do these sorts of things and follow through.
Absolutely. I mean, I still remember, I do this day in, day out, but I still remember how helpless and clueless I felt taking that first baby home, dropping it on the floor in its little cradle and thinking, what in the world do we do now? Yeah. The reality, though, is that parents know far more than they think they do. There is truly no one who knows your baby like you do, and that if you are feeling concerned or worried, then that is a valid in and of itself. Whether it's ended up being validated or not, if you are worried, that is valid in and of itself. What the program does is help build the parents' confidence that they do know this, and that here are a few techniques in which you can express not just your knowledge and your wisdom of your child, but also your love of your child in a way that directs everything towards supporting their development.
All right, Andrew, this is good. Kate, we're going to take a really quick break and we'll come back with our next topic.
Your baby's mind is growing even before they arrive. The more you talk and sing and play, the more their mind will thrive. Every time you interact with your child, you're helping grow their mind. For more information, visit wordsgrowminds.org.au.
Welcome back to Words Grow Minds, today with Professor Andrew Whitehouse. Now, Professor, I want to reopen the conversation by quoting you with a beautiful quote where you said, so often in the history of autism, we've sought to change, say that babies, hey, you're different, we need to change who you are. You've talked about how that's moving, that's old-fashioned, but what can we do to help remove those barriers, to help change the thinking?
I think it's by creating a new narrative. We absolutely did. When I started in the field 20 to 25 years ago, kids who were born and developed fundamentally different, so might be 5 years of age, who were not using spoken language. Our job was to say, let's cure. Let's say that who you are is fundamentally different to what we want. And what we can do is actually create a new narrative around that. And through the emergence of the neurodiversity movement, the sort of pioneering activism of the autistic community has given us that language. For me, and it does mean differently for different things, but for me, what sort of the cherishing of neurodiversity means is that however kids come into the world, they are beautiful just how they are. I mean, it really is the closest thing we have to a miracle, to, have this grow within a woman and then come up to be something that you love beyond belief. It is also true that some kids are born with additional barriers, and it is our job as parents as clinicians, as people who want to care for kids, to remove those barriers. So that might mean helping children learn to talk. It might mean helping children learn to toilet themselves. And what we want to do is remove those barriers so those kids can be whoever they want to be in their life. And, ultimately, that's our job as parents, is to create opportunities for those kids to choose which opportunities they want. And then there's nothing different for the autistic community as well.
Talking a little more broadly, you chaired a committee that generated the country's first national guideline for an autism diagnosis. There is some concern around the big rise in autism diagnoses, especially among boys. Do we know why more children are being diagnosed?
We have a fair amount of evidence. The first thing is that we have changed our definition of autism. When I started in the field 20 years ago, children, and it was only children who got diagnosed, but children only got diagnosed when they had quite significant language impairment and often an intellectual disability. What happened in the mid-90s is we said that actually children can show those core behaviours of autism, but have very verbal spoken language. They could have intellectual abilities well above the normal range. And so all of a sudden we started diagnosing a greater number of and different types of kids as well. There's also huge amounts of awareness, not just from kids and families, but also from clinicians. 20 years ago, most clinicians, we didn't know what autism was. Now, it's sort of in every first year syllabus. So there's that as well. But I think it's also true is that there are just more kids developing differently than there once was. I think that all of our national statistics are indicating that despite us getting wealthier and wealthier as a country, our kids' development has either plateaued or in some indices we're going backwards. We've risen from about 18% of kids within schools requiring support to about 25% over the last 7 or 8 years. That's a huge leap. And we can talk about all the sorts of reasons, but something about our modern environment, and particularly in terms of all the distractions that we have as parents, and it's a bloody hard job being parent, has meant that things are tougher for kids and families. And that has meant that there are more children there being assessed for developmental needs as well. So the great majority is because of how sociological factors in terms of changing definition, as well as how we're our awareness. But I think it's also beyond question now that actually there are more kids struggling now than ever before.
How would you like to see going forward us supporting families, supporting kids to remove those barriers, like we say? What do we need?
We need to reframe family life. The sort of soil in which kids and parenting occurs is time, attention, energy, and space. And we have never been less on that as parents. And there's all sorts of factors. And so obviously that needs a complete society overhaul. But I think that it is also okay for us to talk about that all of the things that we know that support kids and their development, our society has moved away from because of our economic models of all sorts of things. So what can we do without sort of the tearing down of society to create that time, attention, space and energy for parents to be their best selves with their kids? That's obviously not just women, that is men as well. I mean, there's this beautiful stat from the Australian Institute of Health and Australian Institute of Family Studies that shows that parents have never spent more time with their kids than now in our era. Parents have never spent more time with their kids, but we all understand that time is stretched beyond belief. So what can we do? And I think that's a question for you, for all of us. But the first step is acknowledging that we are not growing in the soil that supports child development.
Let's take it right back to early childhood. You outlined some milestones earlier for 12 months, and we're going to get some tips off you afterwards to see where parents can go to look at milestone guidelines to see. But I guess the question is, what can parents do to support their baby's development in the home in those early days?
It is that creating of a time, space, energy and attention to be curious about your baby. And I know how hard that is. For both of the kids, I took a lot of time off for that, and it is exhilarating. It is purposeful. It is also boring and frustrating and hard. And so if you're not a miracle worker and you can't magic all of that up, I think that what we can do is start by being present as we possibly can be with our kids. And let me tell you, I know exactly how hard that is. But it's looking at what makes your baby tick, what makes them happy, what makes them frustrated. Experiment with it, because they're your precious little thing. Experiment with understanding how you react with them, how they react with you. They're a little person, as I said before, who, like you, all they want is to be desperate to be understood. They're desperate to be loved, and they're desperate to be cherished. And that's our job. How can we understand what makes them feel that? And by trying to do everything you can to understand that, you will be doing everything to support your child's social and communication skills. It's not about me saying, do this, do that, do the other. Do what you were born to be as a parent, and I know what you want to do is to help do everything you can to understand what makes them happy, what makes them tick. And by doing that, you will be doing everything you can to support their development.
I'll probably just give a bit of full disclosure here that I'm getting a bit teary in this. And this was not the episode I thought we would have with. But just the time, attention, energy and space, as a parent of, I'm so embarrassed, of a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. Like, it's very hard. You work full time and it's all you want to do. But there is no real way to change the way your life is structured. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's being present. It's really working hard on that. But there are definitely days where you're like, come on, we've got to go to this family function and then we're doing this. And you just feel like half the time you're rushing your kids and you're your worst self for them. And it's hard to get that balance.
There's good news and bad news. I mean, the good news is that it's not rocket science. The bad news is that there's no silver bullet. It's actually really hard sometimes to find that time and to find the space and to be present. But I think it's also really reassuring that when we're looking at early childhood, those are the things that give the best returns. It's not fancy treatments. It's not expensive toys. It's actually interacting with your children and getting to know them. And that's a pretty beautiful thing that we know that everyone can do when they find the time.
I think you're exactly right. And I think the first thing to say is, by you sharing that and me sharing this, is that it is totally impossible. And so nobody's failing on this, or at least if nobody's failing, everyone's doing, really struggling on this. I mean, just yesterday, it was a public holiday within Western Australia, and I had these grand plans. We're going to make slime. We're going to make slime with my kids, and it's going to be magic, and it's going to be this family memory. Well, let me tell you, within about 5 minutes, it had devolved into a bit of a shouting fight, and it wasn't exactly how I went to plan. But childhood is about deep base emotions and feelings. Is that sometimes on the surface we're not our best self, but many of us grow up knowing that our parents loved us, that they cared for us, they did exactly what they felt that was the most important thing. And if our kids can grow up with that base feeling, then we've done what we can do. Yeah.
All right. I think we've smiled, we've had tears, we've covered everything in this episode, Kate. What do you think?
We have. Now, we ask all of our guests the same question at the end of each episode. Now, often Amelia will step in and ask the question, but I'm going to experiment with this today. So first of all, we wanted to ask if you could give parents of babies and toddlers one bit of advice about early differences in babies, about being a parent in general. What's the one piece of advice you've got?
You make a difference. I think that often we're on a treadmill, and I feel it day in, day out. I know that all the families that I see it day in, day out, we are doing, and it's so hard to sort of say this because it sounds so cliched, but we are doing just about the most important thing that we will be doing. Is that genes play such an amazing role, but that love, that understanding that there's this saying that everyone needs someone who is absolutely nuts about them, and that if you are that person for your child, you are making the biggest difference in their life. So my biggest piece of advice is you are making a difference, and by understanding who your child is, that's what you're doing. You're making that difference.
Dr. Andrew Whitehouse, I would subscribe to an app with you recordings of your affirmations if you ever want to branch out into that world. Thank you so much for your time today. We will put in our show notes some of the resources that you love and you know, how parents can look at the Inklings program as well. But that does bring us to the end of today's episode, and we are so grateful for you to have joined us today.
Thank you so much.
Amelia, that conversation got you.
It did.
What do you take away from it?
I wasn't expecting that actually today. I think just the time, attention, energy and space that as a parent, you would in this mad race of just desperately trying to give all of that to your kids, as well as the best upbringing you can possibly do, as well as all the fruit and veg that they need to be eating, as well as, you know, you're just trying to do all these things. And those simple 4 things, time, attention, energy and space, is what you really need. And yeah, it hit me because it's just something that it's so hard to find that balance.
It is hard. And I thought it was interesting, you know, what's the answer? The expert says the answer is reframing the way we think of families and how we do that. And that's a lot easier said than done.
Yeah, I don't have the skill set for that at this point in time. But you know, I think just focusing what's important, and how he said, you know, being present. He did go through some really useful things. And I think when you're feeling overwhelmed, you just feel like I'm doing none of it right. But I did mean what I said. I would love to have his affirmations said to me once in the morning every day.
And we are going to share a whole lot of the resources. I thought one of the things that was really interesting was, you know, we do focus on the physical milestones, but there are a whole lot of communication milestones that parents can look at. And it's not if there's one thing that's off. It's like if there's a series, if there's a pattern there, then to maybe trust your inkling and know that there's support out there. The other thing I loved is we're not trying to fix anyone. We're trying to celebrate and love everyone and assist everyone in the way that is most helpful.
Totally. It's it's glass half full. You're celebrating what they are doing and noticing those things as well. And I think, you know, throughout this podcast series, the word that I keep saying to myself is noticing. You know, that's obviously a part of being present, but I think just noticing and celebrating those little wins as well. And I love that this is the whole purpose of the program is to help a parent connect with your child, you know, in all different kinds of ways. There's no one size fits all.
Absolutely. The other thing was that we know that if parents are worried, if parents are feeling fretful, if parents have an inkling, it's because they know and they love their child. Equally, I'd say if parents are upset and feeling guilty because they can't deliver the universe in which they'd most like to raise their child, it's because they're a great parent and they love their child.
Stop making me cry, okay?
It's gold, Amelia. It's gold.
Can we wrap now, guys?
We can wrap now. Thanks again to Andrew Whitehouse, and we'll see you next time for more Words Grow Minds. Thanks for listening to the Words Grow Minds Parent Podcast. We love hearing from you, so please subscribe, review and comment on the podcast. And for plenty of ideas to support your child's development, go to wordsgrowminds.org.au and follow us on Facebook and Instagram.
Your words will grow their mind.